So welcome to another series from cloudonaut. This is the Builder's Diary. The Builder's Diary is a series to get insights into the day-to-day challenges of builders. So how to build on AWS, learn from other practitioners. And in this volume, I'm talking to Monika from our partner tecRacer, and we are going into how to do cloud migrations successfully. So welcome, Monika, to the show. Nice to have you here. To get started, the first question is, maybe can you tell us a little bit, who are you and where are you coming from?
So hi first to all of you, to you. My name is Monika. Yeah, I come from Germany. I live now in Vienna, and in Germany I studied law and languages. It's called European linguistics. There I studied, I think, for 3.5 years before I came to Vienna, and then I tried to find a way to learn things further, learn also new things. I'm very passionate about languages. I really like to learn new languages, and then I thought, when I came to Vienna, why not learn a new language that is called IT. I wasn't really familiar with IT, and then I came across the word AWS, IT, learned about server and so on, and then I also met tecRacer at a job fair, and this was pretty nice because I saw this was a good opportunity for me to jump into the world of AWS, and yeah, I had a nice and supportive environment at tecRacer who supported me a lot with my change into a new sector. So I wasn't really alone with this, and yeah, there I am, there I come from, and now I'm here working as a migration specialist or migration consultant at tecRacer.
Wow, I would say that's a really cool story. I've very seldomly heard such interesting stories. So. Actually, when I was doing AWS training, I was sometimes joking with the class that learning AWS is basically learning a new language, because everything has a fancy term, right? And basically AWS makes up those terms for us so that we have to learn a new language. And you are really coming from that perspective, and I think that's really, really great and so cool. Okay, wow. So that's very interesting. So basically you transitioned into IT, and now you are an migration specialist and migration consultant, and what is out of interest for me. So maybe can you describe a little bit what's behind that role? So what is a migration consultant, a migration specialist doing?
Yeah, so a migration specialist is also some kind of a transformant consultant, when I can call it like this, because we help the customer to transform their on-premises environment to AWS. We also try to translate everything they have on-premises to AWS services. But it's also not just translating services and finding the right one on AWS. It's also a lot about change management, also saying the right things in the right time to the customer, because we come as a consultant to the customer, so the customer always expect a lot. So we come with our wisdom. We have done like 200 migrations and so on, and of course we have a framework of migration. So we work with the AWS framework that is consisting of 3 phases: of the assess phase, of the mobilize phase, and migrate phase. And in the first phase, we always try to discover what the customer has on premises, what is their strategy to go to AWS, what is their strategy to operate in the cloud, did they communicate it already with the company, is there a team on board that can support the customer in their journey, because of course we are there as a consultant and we help the customer with this. But we always see the most important thing is that the team is enabled from the customer side. And then we try to build good foundations for the customer on AWS. So we try to build, for example, a landing zone, the security, and then we plan the migration with them together. We conduct POCs, we do trainings with them, because enablement for us is one of the biggest things, and also one of the biggest challenges in a migration, because the people were familiar with their on-premise environment, where they worked day to day, for example, as an administrator who took care of servers every day, and now they are working on AWS, where most of the services are managed by AWS. So operating is not that a big issue for them, and they have to find a new job description. So also to bring them on board and maybe support in new things and focusing on, I don't know, application, business value, and so on.
Wow. Okay. So basically what you have on your table, I'm trying to summarize that. So it's project management, it's change management, and it's also a lot of communicating with the client, and also then the technical aspect of everything. So the AWS migration itself. So that's really very interesting or very broad variety of things that you have to cover to basically make sure that the migration succeeds. Monika, another question that comes to my mind is, so how is it to work at tecRacer? So how was the process of getting started there? How does it feel to work with the colleagues in the different locations in Hanover, Duisburg, Frankfurt, Hamburg, Munich, Lucerne, or also Lisbon? So how does all that work out, and how is it actually being at tecRacer?
Right, this is a good question, and I always like to talk about the first days at tecRacer, working as a cloud consultant, even though you have no idea what this really looks like. I like to talk about it because I always hope that it encourages people to also maybe learn new things when they're keen about it. I started at tecRacer with no IT knowledge, and then I had to learn first IT and then also the new language of AWS, which you already mentioned at the beginning, that AWS has its own language. And it was a tough time, I have to say. I really thought a lot of how can I do all this work, because you see always your colleagues who are very far with this topic and you want to come where they are, and then you think about, okay, how I'm going to talk to the clients, to the customer about AWS if I don't even know it myself. So this was a challenging time, and how do I do it? I watched a lot of videos online. I had trainings given by tecRacer, for example, the Accelerating on AWS training on site, but I always had many trainings done by my colleagues just for me, so they answered a lot of my questions I had from day to day about specific topics like, I don't know, what do I do when I have a DDoS attack in my environment? What solution do I have on AWS? And I remember also asking one of the colleagues, and this was the DDoS question, was why aren't there customers who enforced using AWS, because it makes it so easy to prevent such attacks? And I was like, why don't everybody do this? I don't get it, like banks or so on. And then he did a training with me the day after, because he said, okay, there's a big topic around this, also about security, GDPR, what many people concern about. And this is what I learned also. So often when I met a customer, he asked me, is it really secure to have all my workloads on AWS, GDPR and so on? And this is something that I learned day by day. So there's always something new you learn with the new customer project. But for me, the best thing I could do then come into really working with AWS. So watching all the videos didn't help me at all. At the end, when I think about building really infrastructure in AWS, because I think I did the certification after 1 month and I failed because I just watched video and didn't had an idea how services communicating with each other and are dependent from each other. This is what I want to say, and this is what I learned when working for customers. So really getting into this and building stuff.
Wow, so what you're describing really sounds like a supportive environment with all the colleagues that help you to get started with AWS, and also yourself putting a lot of work into that, a lot of learning into that, to learn about all those new concepts, or the new language, of course, and to get started with AWS. So maybe one step ahead. So what happened next? So after you had a first understanding of AWS and the most important services, so do you remember your first projects, your first things that you actually, when did you actually went out to the first customer at tecRacer? So how did that feel and work?
Yeah, I went out after I didn't pass my first certificate for AWS, the solution architect. My managing director took me to a project, to a POC that he wanted to enable at the customer side. And normally the managing director from tecRacer, he doesn't do projects anymore just because there are other topics he has to care about. But for me, this was really challenging, having the managing director wanting me to go with him and doing a POC. But I think this was the perfect project for me to get started with AWS, because I really had to do the basics. Like I had to set up an VPC, put an EC2 instance. I think it was a SUSE Linux instance, and a private VPC, because we wanted to host a SAP HANA database on it. So of course, this SAP stuff was also really new for me, but I had to, I really had a nice POC with security groups, EC2 instances, VPC, publics, private subnet, and all this stuff. And IAM roles, for example, identity and access management. So this was the perfect POC or project for me to really learn AWS. And I really also had here support. So shout out to my colleagues who are really supportive on this. Whenever I get stuck, they help me with building the infrastructure, even though I think the most of the people who are listening to this now might say, wow, this is so easy, building a VPC and so on. I know now after 2 years, I would say yes.
It is still not easy.
Sometimes it can be challenging, right? Because especially at the beginning, everyone told me like build infrastructure with infrastructure as code. And I would say, I first have to do this stuff in the GUI, like clicking and so on. But really, you forget so many things when building a VPC, which subnet must be public, which configuration I have to do now. And I think step by step, you forget something. So then I discovered also infrastructure as code was what was really interesting then as well, because it's, when you are familiar to code, I think it's easier then to set things up.
Wow, very cool. So so definitely. So you really had a very cool learning curve with the real projects. You could transfer the knowledge that you gain from your videos and your learning to real work with every customer. That is, I think, the best thing you can do. And still today, after many years working with AWS, I'm learning a lot when doing project work, because every time you learn something new. I think that's for beginners and also for advanced, still the best way to learn, actually. Yeah,
hands-on.
Okay, so at the beginning, we already talked a little bit about it. So you are a cloud migration specialist at tecRacer. We discussed what that means a little bit already, but what I'm interested in now is that we go a little bit through a typical migration project. You already mentioned 3 phases, so maybe let's go through that a little bit to give our listeners an idea of what migration looks like and how also big migration projects work out. So maybe let's start again to repeat the different phases, because I already only remember one of them. So the first one is what I remember. This is the assess phase. And then there were 2 others. Can you remind me about them one more time, please?
Yeah, of course. So this is the framework that AWS gives us with the Migration Accelerating Program. The first phase is, as you said, the assess phase. The second one is the Mobilize phase. And the third one is the Migration and Modernize phase.
Okay, so basically that is the structure that AWS developed over the years, and partners like tecRacer as an AWS consulting partner uses that framework for their migration projects as well, and just gives you probably a very good structure to work with.
Yeah, it's on one side, it's a good structure for the partners to work with, like tecRacer, to see what is the best way on taking the customer from on-site to AWS. But on the other hand, the Migration Accelerating Program is a nice way for the customer, because the customer can here profit from AWS fundings that are given with the Migration Accelerating Program, which makes it more easy for the customer to decide to go to the cloud because they don't have the project cost at the first.
Okay, so that's not only basically a process and a structure, it's also a funding for the project. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the 3 phases next. So the first one is the assess phase, and what should be considered during that phase? So what's the most important things to look for? What do you have on your to-do list when going through that phase?
Yeah, there are some things to think about when we are in assess phase. What we first we do first the learning for the customer to show him the way to the cloud. What does the migration mean for him? So we conduct, for example, a migration immersion day. That is a workshop that takes 1 day. And we show the customer all the phases and what we will do in the migration. The second thing that we do is conducting a migration readiness assessment with the customer. We always like to do this on site. The migration readiness assessment is a workshop where we ask the customer 80 questions, which sounds a lot and is a lot. This is why it's a whole day workshop. And there we ask the customer how they are working right now, what do they have, like, for example, which processes they have in place, do they have standardized architecture, are they already working with AWS, do they have config management in place, or do they do the configuration manually? All this is what we ask the customer. We also ask about the strategy, because this is one of the most important things, to ask the customer if they already have a strategy in place. This is what I mentioned at the beginning, which is also a really important part. And then after the migration readiness assessment, we identify, with the migration readiness assessment, we try to identify gaps, which mean what do we have to tackle when we do the migration. For example, do the customer already have a configuration management? If yes, we don't need to come in and teach him about configuration management or implement a tool like Jenkins, Ansible, or Chef or something like this. We just keep it like it is. We, of course, do a review on this, but we can take it. But if not, we come in with our consultants and we help them to implement configuration management tasks or tools in their company. And then also we do a business case, which is for the customer most of the time the most important part, because it contains a calculation on how the cost will be on AWS for the customer. We call it ARR, which is the annual recurrent revenue, or the Amazon or AWS run rate for the customer. And yeah, with this in mind, the customer always compares the cost from on-premises to AWS. So if the costs are too high, for example, for the customer, he might rethink his strategy to go to AWS. But we always also say that what comes with the cost in AWS is also that you have a lot of managed tasks and so on. So the customer, we also have to inform about all this, and also we give him an idea on how the migration project costs are, and give him also an overview how we do in the Mobilize phase and the Migrate.
To summarize all of that, so the assess phase is basically, first of all, to gain a basic understanding about the upcoming migration project. So it's important for you as the consulting partner, but also for the customer. Then it's creating the business case, so actually comparing the costs on premises with the projected costs on AWS. And is there anything else that is important about the assess phase?
Oh yeah, I forgot the most important part of the assess phase, actually, because in the assess phase we also create an inventory of service and applications and databases that the customer uses on premises. So we gain information on all what is on premises, to of course also know how big is the scope of our migration. So for example, the customer has, I don't know, 600 servers, and what is running on the servers. We do a quick, we work in workshops together with the customer and try to identify how we can bring the first workloads to AWS. This calls, we attach some migration strategies. For example, we say all the servers will be brought to the cloud with the lift and shift approach, or we do a re-platform for the databases, which basically means that we take the databases and host them on RDS and not on an EC2 instance on AWS. And this is what we talk a lot about with the customer. And of course, this inventory, we also need to do the calculation, because if we don't know what's there, we don't know how to calculate this. So this is a big part. And yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so that's the assess phase. And then the next one is the mobilize phase. So what is this phase about?
This phase is there, and I also always call this the heart of migration, because there you do the enabling of the migration team or the cloud team at the customer side. We go in with trainings, with setting up the AWS environment, like for example the landing zone. We have a cloudracer landing zone which builds up the account setup, the network setup, and so on. And this is what we basically go inside there. We also do a security assessment and implement all the security necessities for the customer. But this is really important. This is called the mobilize phase. So we don't just go in there as consultants and implement the stuff and then we go. We work very close together with the customer, because we really need to know what the customer needs. For example, if we just go in there and migrate the workloads to the cloud, we don't know if there are any compliance constraints, security necessities, for example, encryption, and so on, that are necessary for the customer. So we need to have all this in place before we migrate into the AWS cloud.
Mm-hmm. So what I like a lot about what you're describing is, because what I've often seen with lift and shift projects is that basically the training part, the getting the people ready to do their new tasks on AWS comes far too late in the project. And I think it's really important to have that at the very beginning, so to make sure that the people that have to do the work actually have been trained and know what is coming up and where are the pitfalls that they maybe should avoid and stuff like that. So I think that's very helpful to have that at that part of the migration project.
True, and we had one project where we did the mobilize phase and we set up the landing zone, we did security, and we did some POC migrations, which is also a big part of gaining experience. Pilot migrations, we call it, where we try to bring, for example, a part of the application or one application to the AWS cloud with a run book, for example. And there the people always gain a lot of experience. And we had one project, what I wanted to say is where we had the trainings at the end of already gaining experience and stuff. And then the people said, so what do we do this now with the trainings? It doesn't help us. We should have done it before to know what we do when we do the pilot migrations and setting up the landing zone. So yeah, this is the first thing we go in, doing trainings with the customer and all the team on their side. Okay.
So basically it is about getting the people ready for the migration. It's about getting the foundation on AWS ready with the VPCs, with the landing zone, security governance and all that stuff. Is there anything else to that mobilize phase?
Yeah, this is actually something, for example, operations as well. This is what I mentioned before, when, for example, I have to come in with configuration management, also talking about backup, disaster recovery strategies on really how we want to operate in the future in the cloud, also patching when we talk about EC2 instances and so on. And also we have one phase more, which is the migration phase, and which is the phase where we actually migrate. And therefore we need to have a good plan in hand, because with a good plan in hand, we can be successful in a migration. We are more successful in migration So we want to make sure that for every application, we have a runbook in place which says how we will migrate every application and in which waves, which means we have a time frame in which we already plan which application will be migrated when, which team is related to every application, who's the product owner. So we do a real deep application discovery to also see which interdependencies we have. Again, the word within the applications to really know how we're going to migrate and also what every application needs in order to work on AWS.
Okay. And basically with that plan, you then start the third phase, which is actually doing the work of migrating and shifting the workloads from on-premises to AWS. What's your role in this last phase of the migration project? Can you describe that? What is the important things that you have to do there?
Yeah, from our experience, from the projects that we have until now in migrations was more of a project management role, like having the teams set up for all the applications, having the runbooks together, and we always come in with technical consultants as well. So, for example, if we want to do re-architecting for a customer on container, for example, and the customer didn't work with container in advance, we design the target architecture. We designed it earlier, and we do then the migration as well with the customer. But this is more the technical part, which the technical consultant do from tecRacer together with the customer. And what would be more my role is more of the project management, to supervise that everything is going as planned, to see step by step what is needed in order to migrate successfully. Do we need support from AWS also? If something doesn't go right. For example, my colleague had the experience that he wanted to migrate a MongoDB to AWS, to I think it was DocumentDB, and they first tried it on the EC2 instance, and it worked out well. But they wanted then to modernize it kind of and bring it to DocumentDB. But the performance wasn't that good as expected. And so they needed to take into account also the AWS support to see how we can leverage this problem on AWS. And basically what they had to do is to go back on the EC2 instance, because the performance on the EC2 instance for this kind of database was better than being on the DocumentDB. And also this is interesting on the other side to see how the support from AWS is, that they see, okay, it's not working as it is, but we're going to work on this so it may be also working for your workloads or for your application as wished.
Okay, so you're in close contact with AWS as well and giving them feedback on the outcomes of the migration as well. Okay, so one other thing that comes to my mind is, so you mentioned that part of the assess phase is getting an inventory for planning the migration. And that's what I've seen in some big migration project that I was part of, that this is really a lot of work to get a list with thousands of machines and applications, and you kind of, no one knows which application is running on this machine and all stuff. A lot of things are unclear. So getting all that data together is a lot of work. That's what I tried to say. So do you have any best practices on how to do that? Are there any tools that you're using? So how do you make sure you have that inventory, to have data that you can really use to make informed decisions based on?
Yeah, what we always try to bring in to collect the information on the on-premises environment is the Migration Evaluator, which is an agentless tool, is a collector that needs to be installed on the customer side on a Windows machine in order to gather all the information of the on-premises infrastructure. So we take this, and it will run for at least 2 weeks at the customer's side. So it gets connected to all the environment on the customer side. and gives us information on which servers exist, what is running there, maybe not what is running there, but how the machines are used. For example, the percentage of usage on the customer, how many CPUs it has, what is the storage, and so on. And this gives us, for example, also a good idea on how many databases are there, so how many matches we can do to RDS, for example, and which strategies can we attach to these workloads. Do they have also maybe things that they didn't know they have? For example, if we gather all the information we have, then the list of the server, for example, in the Excel sheet, and we always go through the Excel sheet then with the customer. And we had one customer where we went through the list and he said, okay, this machine isn't used, this machine isn't used neither. And we went through the list of, I think it were 400 server. And then in the end, we had 200 servers. So we helped the customer to clean up his environment, his inventory, which helped him, of course, a lot as well. And yeah, really the Migration Evaluator is a plus because you can use it also to then map the servers on AWS already, because you have the Migration Evaluator GUI, I would say, as well, where it shows you how expensive it is to run on AWS. And if you don't have the Migration Evaluator tool, you get the information from the customer, and very often there are some missing information that we can't work with. For example, the usage of the server, which give us an idea if we really need to map such a big instance on AWS, or if we can also use smaller instances or not. And if we don't have this information, of course, we have to one-on-one mapping on AWS, which might not be so cost effective for the customer, of course, then.
Yeah, so basically the migration is a good step to re-evaluate the list of inventory you have to make sure you're only migrating that stuff that you really need, and also make sure you're resizing the machines as well. So one part that you mentioned I want to highlight is that the AWS Migration Evaluator is collecting the data over a period of time, so probably a few weeks or even a month or so, to make sure that you have the utilization data over time, so that you're not missing, I don't know, the important first day of the month or something where a lot of work happens in the workload or something like that. So I think that is really really powerful tool to get on the database for the decisions. And right sizing EC2 instances is, whenever you do a migration, is something that everyone is afraid of. Everyone is afraid of downsizing machines because it might cause an issue, right? So having data that backs up that decision is really important. I could imagine. I've never used the Migration Evaluator, but it sounds like a very good tool for that.
Absolutely, yeah.
So one thing that came to my mind when I looked into the AWS Migration Evaluator is, and this is what other tools are also sometimes missing, is it looks at the CPU and memory consumption, and also I think about the storage that is attached to the machines. But the one important aspect that I have been running into when doing migrations sometime is the network throughput, because the EC2 instance type has also an effect on the maximum and baseline network performance. And when you migrate workloads with really high network utilization, that might be an issue as well. I think that's something that the Migration Evaluator is not covering, and probably something that you have to keep in mind when going through the list, to ask the customer about those probably rare but important machines in in the workload.
This is why we do the workshops after, because we gather a lot of information with the Migration Evaluator, but there are still things we don't know, like which application is it? Is it the most important workload you need, you also have? And is it critical, for example? So for critical applications, we always handle them differently, right, than non-critical workloads. And also what you say, this is probably an information that the people who are working with these applications and servers would tell us when we do the migration workshop, because we go list through list, and then we say, okay, we need here a lot of network throughput, you should keep that in mind, and then we would write it down and note it directly matched to the server.
Perfect. Yeah,
good point.
Makes sense. Okay, so So we talked about the migration process. I learned a lot about that process. I really liked having that structure. I've never thought about a migration that way. That's really interesting to me. We learned about the Migration Evaluator, which is also an interesting tool, I would say. And then another thing that is out of interest for me, I just want to get some of your experience from the cloud migration projects that you've been doing is, what would you say are important factors of a successful migration? So what is important to get right? Are there the most dangerous areas maybe, or what do you have to watch for to make sure the whole thing becomes a success?
So I think the most important part of the migration are the people, is really the customer and the team behind it, because we always experience when the migration strategy isn't really communicated throughout the whole company, and there isn't real support from the whole team who's working with the applications from day to day, and there isn't a team who will work with AWS Cloud. It is always hard to do the migration, because we can't just go in as a consultant, take the environment and bring it to the cloud. This might be a dream for every customer to say, okay, we have the consultant for this and they're going to do it for us. But it's not this. We really need the employees who work with the application day to day, the application owner who can tell us which might be what might be very important when migrating and testing also the applications and giving all the information about their environment. I think this is the most important part, because they are the only one who know their environment really good and their inventory, and we just come in for a small period of time, and having them worked already 10 years with their applications. So for me, it's really the people. And this is why I also think having the coronavirus, and I don't want to mention it actually in this podcast, but actually being on site at the customer and seeing the climate at the customer side and understanding what might be some issues. Are there people who are itchy about going to the cloud? Understanding this and knowing what we have to tackle in the migration, not only that how are servers migrated to the cloud, but also do we have to do maybe more trainings in this area? Do we have to talk more about how we can realize container, do some workshops in this? And that is really important, I think, for migration. So being on site without Corona is also really nice, to getting to know and having a coffee with the, server admin who can say, you know what, I like to manage servers. I don't want to go into the AWS cloud. Hearing this is also very important, because you have to tackle it somehow.
Definitely. Yeah. So yeah, for me, that's always the most tricky part. I've learned that a lot when doing consulting work as well. So I'm always coming in with technical solutions, but most important are probably the business, the people, to get the whole thing up and running. So I think that's really important to have to take care of that and make sure that the whole thing becomes a success, and not only a technical perfect solution which no one wants to use. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah.
So wow, that was quite a ride through AWS cloud migrations, I would say. Before we end this, I think the important thing that we have to mention is that tecRacer is looking for other migration specialists like you. So when you are out there and you think, oh, that sounds interesting, I want to work in that area, basically organizing and executing migration projects, then you should definitely apply for this position at tecRacer. You will find details about the open positions in the video description and the show notes. Check that out and highly recommend it. And I think you already described that there's really a supportive environment at tecRacer to get you started, even if you're starting from scratch with AWS. That's really powerful, I would say.
Yeah, and I can say we're always happy to embrace new people in our team, and our migrations team, to bring this forward.
Perfect. So thank you very, very much for sharing insights into your day-to-day work in successful cloud migrations. This was really interesting. I learned a lot from you. Thanks very much for taking the time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, Andreas.